Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to see so many friends, partners, and longtime champions of democracy here to celebrate the Committee of 70's 121st anniversary. Thank you for being with us tonight. Your presence is a powerful reminder that this work matters. I'm Barbara Adams, a proud member of the Committee of 70's Board of Directors and its Vice Chair, and someone who spent most of my career working with and at times inside government, where integrity, accountability, and public trust are not just ideas. They're the framework that keeps democracy standing. The Committee of 70's steady, nonpartisan, and deeply principled work to assure free, fair, and secure elections has never been more relevant than now. The election held last week was a powerful reminder of why this work matters. Like every election, it wasn't perfect. There were some administrative challenges, the kinds of issues that inevitably arise when millions of people are voting across thousands of precincts. But the important thing is this: the process worked. Voters showed up. Poll workers and election officials did their jobs with integrity and professionalism. When problems surfaced, they were defined, they were addressed, and corrected quickly. And when the polls closed, Pennsylvania's elections once again did what they were meant to do: reflect the will of the people freely and fairly. That is what success looks like in a democracy. Not perfection, but performance. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of accountability. And that's what the Committee of 70 has stood for 121 years. When people lose faith in elections, 70 helps restore it. When confusion threatens participation, 70 provides clarity. When misinformation spreads, 70 responds with facts and transparency, creating trust. I've seen from experience, as General Counsel for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and later at the Philadelphia Housing Authority, and throughout my career in public finance in private legal practice, I've seen how fragile public trust can be, how challenging it can be to uphold. The Committee of 70 keeps that trust intact through education, focus, and engagement. When I worked in and with government, we knew that rules are what make fairness possible. That's what 70 protects: the rules of democracy, the systems and safeguards that ensure every voter, regardless of party or zip code, is treated equally and fairly. Democracy doesn't collapse in a single day. It weakens quietly when citizens lose confidence that their voices matter, or when cynicism replaces participation. The Committee of 70 pushes back against that erosion, not with rhetoric, but with action. It shows that good governance is not a partisan goal, it's a shared responsibility. So tonight, as we celebrate 121 years of service, let's take pride in what worked, not just in this election, but in the anchored, resilient system that reflects who we are when we engage in good faith, as citizens, as neighbors, and as Pennsylvanians. It's easy to focus on what goes wrong. The harder, more hopeful work is to fix what's broken and to nurture and improve upon what's going right. That's what the Committee of 70 does. We don't accept things as they are, but patiently, persistently, insist that they can and must be better, with an optimism grounded in action. Election integrity has emerged as a defining challenge of our time and fits squarely into 70's 121-year-old mission. Let's all embrace that challenge and work continuously to assure that our elections are free, fair, and secure. I'm deeply proud to be part of this work, and I hope you are too. It's now my honor to welcome to the stage my fellow board member, Sean Newman, General Counsel at Brandywine Realty Trust, our presenting sponsor. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here tonight as both a board member of the Committee of 70 and a representative of Brandywine Realty Trust, a proud sponsor of this great event. At Brandywine, we believe that strong communities are built on a foundation of civic engagement. That's why we're honored to support the Committee of 70 and its mission to strengthen democracy and empower citizens across our region. One of the ways you may know Brandywine is Schuylkill Yards, one of our most ambitious and transformative projects. Schuylkill Yards is quickly evolving into a vibrant West Philadelphia neighborhood, one that blends innovation and connection. It's a place where people live, work, create, and engage. And it reflects our belief that development should serve not just the economy, but the life of our city as well. I'll leave you now with a quick video that is a snapshot of that vision in motion. And thank you again for being here tonight, and thank you for your continued commitment to building a stronger, more engaged Philadelphia.
Welcome, and thank you for being here to mark the 121st anniversary of the Committee of 70. This room is filled with exemplary civic leadership. Thank you to Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon for joining us, Representative Jordan Harris, and Sincere Harris for representing Mayor Parker and her administration. We're grateful for your leadership and commitment to expanding opportunity and civic participation. My name is Lauren Christella, and I'm the CEO of the Committee of 70. To our presenting sponsor, Brandywine Realty Trust, and to Jerry Sweeney, your longstanding support strengthens our community fabric and sets a standard for corporate citizenship in Philadelphia. Thank you to our individual presenting sponsor, the Lau Longsworth Charitable Fund, for your continued generous support, and thank you to our board, our members, and our distinguished guests, and the more than a dozen elected officials and public servants joining us for our program this evening. When the team and I were pulling together the program a few months ago, we settled on this kind of unsettling graphic. It's jarring, it's a bit disjointed. It looks like that feeling you know when you don't even realize that you're holding your breath and your shoulders are up around your ears. You know it, you know what I'm talking about. That's how I might describe this current moment, the state that we're all kind of in right now. So acknowledging that, we wanted to invite you in for something a little different, into one of my absolute favorite places. This is the place where I started my career here in Philadelphia, and it's always felt like home to me here at the Constitution Center. And yes, there are moments that feel like this, uncomfortable, tense. We're living through a time of uncertainty, polarization, and pure political dysfunction. That creates a lot of anxiety. but the conversations we're having tonight and the actions we are committed to taking. These are the anecdotes to that anxiety. Look around this room. We have Teddy Roosevelt's men, and now women, in the arena. We are among the brave people serving on the school board and from City Hall to the halls of Congress here with us tonight. We have business leaders and civic leaders navigating economic and geopolitical shifts. We don't all agree on every issue, yet here we are, here together tonight. As the CEO of the Committee of 70, I see the value of our work every single day. And I am reassured and inspired by the business leaders who came together to found our organization 121 years ago. Looking back at that time, at the dawn of the 20th century, Philadelphia was one of the most corrupt cities in the nation. Political machines controlled our elections, but a small group of civic leaders refused to accept that as Philadelphia's destiny. They believed their city could live up to its founding ideals, and they set out and stepped up to make that happen. Among them was Sam Fells, a soap maker turned philanthropist who believed business had a duty to serve the public good. Alongside him were lawyers and businessmen and other reformers who left the comfort of their offices to confront entrenched power, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. They began by shining a light on corruption, exposing irregularities in voter rolls and cronyism in City Hall. And when they couldn't find candidates committed to reform, they created their own municipal party to give voters a real choice. Those early reformers didn't just fight corruption, they changed systems. Their work helped bring about civil service standards that prioritized merit over political loyalty. They championed Philadelphia's Home Rule Charter, which reorganized city government to make it more accountable and transparent. And over decades, the Committee of 70 has stayed true to their spirit, pushing for campaign finance limits, fighting gerrymandering, and defending the integrity of elections ever since. Through depression and war, through social upheaval and shifting demographics, through moments of deep division and partisanship, the Committee of 70 has remained a constant, steady, clear-eyed, and never swayed by the shifting political winds or deepening tides. And here we are again, 121 years later, meeting the moment with that same resolve. But the state we're in, and democracy itself, requires more from all of us. Consider this: Pennsylvania would have nearly 120,000 more voters if all of its eligible 18-year-olds were registered to vote. Among 18 and 19-year-olds, only 25% are registered, compared to 74% of those 45 and older. That's not just a statistic, that is a wake-up call. And it's one of the reasons why we partnered with the Community College of Philadelphia to launch the first program in Pennsylvania that integrates the Department of State's voter registration system into the college's application system that will absolutely increase the number of registrations in this state. It's also why we're working to support K-12 teachers and parents in making civics education a priority, so that the next generation not only understands how government works, but sees themselves as active participants through our work as leaders in the PA Civics Coalition. Strengthening our democracy isn't just up to institutions. It depends on all of us. And there's a role for everyone to play, whatever your time, talents, and comfort level. Serve as a poll worker. Pennsylvania needs 40,000 people to serve as one of democracy's essential workers twice a year, every year. And if you live in the Northeast, come find me or Commissioner Bluestein. We have spots to fill in dire need. Participate in our We Vote and Draw the Lines initiatives, which engage people of all ages in redistricting, civic education, you name it. And for those who want to go deeper, join one of 70's advocacy efforts, from fighting for civics education funding to finally eradicating the decades-long corruption in the Philadelphia Sheriff's Office. Each of these actions, no matter how big or small, are how we continue the legacy of those who decided in Philadelphia in 1776 and reaffirmed with 70's founding in 1904 that government must be accountable to the governed, and that democracy must always be defended by the people themselves. Philadelphia and this nation were established by the people who were unafraid to test a bold new experiment in self-governance. For more than a century, the Committee of 70 has helped carry that experiment forward, showing the Commonwealth what democracy looks like, and we will continue to do so. And I'm excited to announce, I have a number here, but I'm going to increase it, thanks to John Chu and his wife Teresa. We have now hit our goal of $575,000 that you all helped raise for us tonight will fuel that work going forward. So thank you very much. So tonight, as we celebrate our anniversary, let us honor the reformers who came before us by recommitting ourselves to their work, questioning the status quo, demanding accountability, seeking truth and telling it, and rebuilding a republic that is not only free, but fair, inclusive, and strong. Thank you for being part of the mission, for showing up, for engaging, and for believing that our democracy is worth fighting for. And now, allow me to introduce tonight's program, The State We're In, led by Ross Douthat and Schmidt. Ross Douthat is a New York Times op-ed columnist and the youngest ever when he joined the page in 2009. He's the author of 5 books, including The Decadent Society, To Change the Church, Bad Religion, Privilege, and The Deep Places. He is known for his sharp, provocative arguments that invite serious engagement across ideological lines. By day, Al, and yes, I still get to call him Al, is Pennsylvania's Secretary of the Commonwealth, leading the state's work to ensure free, fair, safe, and secure elections. He also brings a decade of on-the-ground experience as a former Philadelphia City Commissioner, where he helped administer, count, and certify elections, including during the 2020 election. I don't think I need to remind anyone of that, when his efforts earned him the Presidential Citizens Medal from President Biden. Tonight, he joins us as a citizen of Pennsylvania and in his personal capacity, and as a former CEO and lifelong friend of the Committee of 70, and as someone who has always stood up for nonpartisan integrity and practical reform. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Ross Douthat and Secretary Al Schmidt.
Okay, all right. Oh. Wow. They're extremely comfortable chairs. I would expect nothing less from the hospitable city of Philadelphia. Goodness, okay. I'm gonna unbutton my jacket and settle in. Imagine yourself being welcomed to an episode of Masterpiece Theater. I think that's the vibe we're going to go for tonight. That was a lovely introduction. I'm so honored and grateful to be here tonight in this wonderful space, having a conversation about some of the most important subjects before us as a country, and a conversation as an interviewer, I should say, with a fairly high degree of difficulty. Because of course, Secretary Schmidt, while a Republican, occupies his office in a nonpartisan capacity, which means that my long list of questions about Josh Shapiro's presidential prospects are apparently unanswerable on this stage. So I had to scrap a number of questions. But thank you so much for doing this,
No, thank you,
Secretary Schmidt. And so we're going to try and talk a little bit about the state we're in a literal sense, talk about sort of Pennsylvania as a swing state and a bellwether for the country as a whole, talk a bit about elections and how you run a fair election that people believe in, and then talk just a tiny bit about reasons for pessimism and reasons for optimism about sort of the culture of politics in the country as a whole. And then there'll be time for just a few questions. Just so you know, there will be microphones. There's a microphone there. The lights are very bright. I can't see exactly where the microphones are, but I imagine you can see them, and we'll do about 10 minutes of questions at the end. So let's start. I was talking to one of the many distinguished people here before we sat down, and I noted that I have managed to live in my life in Boston, New Haven, New York City, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C., but I've never lived in Philadelphia. So I am a true outsider in some way relative to other parts of the Northeast, to this great state. And I want you to imagine yourself imagine that I'm a total outsider to the politics of Pennsylvania. And I say to you, why is Pennsylvania a swing state?
I would say that despite all the changes that I think our state has seen in the last decade or more, there's been a really significant realignment when it comes to voter registration, when it comes to voting patterns, when it comes to which party seems to rely more on what are called low propensity voters, voters who are less likely to vote. So much of that has shifted. When I worked for the state Republican Party in 2010, there were 1 million more Democrats than Republicans. In 2020, that number was about 500,000 more Democrats than Republicans. As of a couple weeks ago, it was about 50,000 more Democrats than Republicans. So it is a very closely aligned state, despite significant changes in Western Pennsylvania becoming more Republican and the Southeast becoming more Democratic.
Talk a little bit more, you mentioned low propensity voters. Talk a little bit more about how you see the coalitions changing in terms of not just obviously geographical, but also sort of class and the college education versus non-college education. How is the Republican Party of today in Pennsylvania look different than the Republican Party of your youth overall?
I would say the real kind of changing of places in terms of where most of that support is coming from. When I first started in Philadelphia, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh a lifetime ago, and then went to college up by Erie and lived there for a while, and then the last 20 years in Philadelphia, now Harrisburg as well. But when I worked in Republican politics, the suburban counties right outside of Philadelphia were a sort of firewall. So Democrats would have significant turnout in Philadelphia, and then the surrounding 4 counties would sort of like wipe that out, and then the rest of the state would sort of choose the winner and the loser. That's really changed significantly with the counties surrounding Philadelphia becoming far more blue and have a pretty more highly educated population, upper middle class, certainly not exclusively, but I think sort of Democrats capturing that universe of voters is really starting to reflect itself. Like this last election that we just had, turnout was pretty high, but it was a lot lower among Republicans. And that's kind of unique in my experience in off-year elections. Typically Republicans would show up in off-year elections.
Right.
And now, at least in more recent experience, Democrats have been.
Yeah, I mean, that's in that sense, the state is tracking the patterns of the country as a whole. And I mean, one of the striking things that I remember from when I was a young New York Times columnist was that there was always this assumption that midterms were good for Republicans,
right,
and presidential years were good for Democrats. And then that, sort of shaped how both parties thought about a lot of issues related to voter registration and voter ID and all of these kinds of issues. There was just sort of an assumption that the Democratic Party had, broadly speaking, benefited from higher turnout, benefited from lower propensity voters voting, and that the Republican Party, let's just say, did not, right? And that's not the landscape now, right?
It isn't, at least recently, and I think that even though the turnout is lower in these off-year elections, doesn't mean there aren't significant offices on the ballot. In Pennsylvania, we elect judges.
Right.
And those judges are up in those off-year elections. So they have real consequences. And I know it's something that people involved in elections always say, that every election is important, and this is the most important election we've ever had before. And we say it because it's true.
That's what we say professionally. It's very important for newspaper readership.
And
To maintain a constant thread of hysteria running through your readership's minds at all times.
But, you know, there are significant offices on the ballot. A lot of them are local races, the people who represent you closest to home, the people who I would argue have a far bigger impact on your life than who President of the United States is or many other offices. Obviously, it doesn't mean that's, obviously that office is extremely important, don't get me wrong, but those local offices really do matter to people, and it's frustrating when turnout isn't what it really should be.
Yeah, I want to tiptoe towards partisan politics on that question, but first, just tell me about your own upbringing. Were you always a Republican? Did you come from a Republican family?
I came from a Republican voting Democratic family, if that makes any sense. Much like a lot of Western Pennsylvanians.
Right, so Reagan Democrat, like people who had been New Deal, your parents
had been New Deal
Democrats.
And then, Ronald Reagan, it's funny, I never talk about these personal things, but Ronald Reagan in 1980, 81, when he came in, my parents started a business, a small business at the time, and I think, you know, sitting around the kitchen table, it was something that I think they really responded to, and that led to that sort of change. When I first registered to vote, I was a registered independent for a while, and then when I moved to Boston for graduate school, that's when I changed to Republican.
Yeah, that happens to a lot of people who move to Boston for graduate school.
And become a Republican. But at the time, remember, Bill Weld is governor. Mitt Romney is running for Senate against Ted Kennedy. There was a whole kind of variant of the Republican Party that was still pretty vibrant in Massachusetts.
Were you in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, or?
No, I was in the city of
You were in the
Pittsburgh.
city.
And then moved in a lot of the same corridor that you did,
Right.
between Boston and DC.
What can I ask? What kind of business your parents were in?
My dad worked for Westinghouse Corporation, and then he left and started a small business doing sort of industrial market research for firms that were doing big acquisitions.
Yeah, I'm curious, just in terms of the shifts in sort of how the party coalitions work and so on, right? Like the way that you have sort of middle-class constituencies that were always Democratic, who moved into the Republican coalition, like your parents did, right? And then college-educated professional class constituencies who would have also been Reagan, like, you know, the belt of suburbs, right, around Philadelphia, would have been the reliable Republicans who your parents would have joined to create the Reagan coalition, in effect, right? And so, but now the Trump coalition is probably still people like your parents. The Republican coalition has a lot of small business people, obviously, but has that plus many more sort of blue-collar, working-class, and rural voters. And the Democratic coalition is much more affluent and professional, but along with, anyway,
it's somewhat difficult for me to speak to a little bit because I'm not a partisan political creature. I'm not involved in party politics whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. I'm a registered voter. I vote and all the rest, but we only know it from data, right? And where turnout is occurring, where it's increasing, where it's decreasing, age cohorts, which age cohorts are increasing in turnout or decreasing in turnout. It's just all very empirical. A lot of people involved in elections and politics have really good instincts, and I don't. But I have data and access to all of it. So it's helpful at least to sort of see and track those trends over time.
Do you see any change, again, tiptoeing towards partisan politics, as there's been this shift? This is something I'm very curious about, towards the Republicans as a coalition with more low-propensity voters. Do you see any shift in how either Republicans or Democrats who you interact with think about issues about turnout, election security, voter ID, and so on? Because, again, for a long time, The Republican Party would say, we're the party of voter ID, we want to make sure there's no voter fraud. And this was connected to some degree, the Republican Party's interest in maybe not turning out every single low propensity voter, right? But today, if the Republicans are the coalition of low propensity voters, right, that interestingly changes the party's incentives, and there's some similar issues with Democrats, where Democrats no longer can count on big boosts if a lot of low propensity voters turn out. And you must interact with people who have strong opinions on the best way to run elections.
Absolutely.
But do you see that as
especially
still,
in the last several years?
Do you see the two parties still, broadly speaking, it's still Republicans are most likely to ask you about voter ID and election security, and Democrats are most likely to ask you about, to use the registering everyone at community college?
Voter access.
Yeah. So the two parties still have the same broad attitudes, even as their coalitions have shifted.
Yeah, and I can't really speak anecdotally because I'm probably not talking in any way to a representative,
That's what anecdotes are for.
of people, but I do appear in front of committees a lot in the House and the Senate.
Yeah,
in Harrisburg, and it typically is, but not exclusively, Democrats advocating for always improving voter access, and Republicans pushing for strengthening election integrity.
Yeah.
That dynamic.
No, that's what I observed too. It is interesting because those positions were completely in sync with the two parties' electoral interests 15 years ago, and now I think they're quite out of sync. So it's interesting to see if that just, in a way, it's a vindication of both sides' sort of principled beliefs, in a way, if they stick with them, even if it doesn't benefit them politically.
I have to say the biggest change in the sort of area that we're talking about has been how incredibly interested people are in elections who were never interested in elections before, who have access to all sorts of information, not necessarily accurate information, not necessarily reliable information. And this perverse dynamic, and we've seen it in Pennsylvania, we've seen it across the country, where elections have never been more free and fair and safe and secure, with a paper ballot record of every vote that's cast in Pennsylvania. Whether you vote by mail or you vote with a hand-marked ballot at your polling place or a ballot marking device, there's a paper ballot record that's used in 2 audits after every election. So that kind of perverse dynamic where elections have improved so much, with so much greater transparency, reliability, integrity, and all the rest, is at a time where we're facing such doubt when it comes to confidence in elections. And for many years now, and Committee of 70 and everybody else has dealt with this as well, is how impervious, it's almost like dealing with a belief system, how impervious it is to facts. So even if you audit everything, even if everything is transparent, even if there are outside observers in the room from both parties and candidates, it's difficult to change people's minds about a lot of this, and it's certainly frustrating.
Yeah, I want to talk about where that comes from, but first let's do a kind of man in the moment of action discussion. Let's assume that Governor Shapiro is reelected in 2026 and you get to preside over the 2028 presidential election. On election night, tell me, where will you be and what will you be worried about?
Well, in Harrisburg, the Secretary of State and the Department of State always operates out of basically like a command center.
A bunker? Is it a bunker?
No, it's not underground, but
not yet.
Big screens on the wall with counties and what's going on everywhere to make sure that there aren't issues. And again, I'm here in a personal capacity, so I'm not here on behalf of the Department of State. I'm not speaking for the administration or officials or agencies or departments or anything like that, but that's where the Department of State operates out of. In close contact with all of our counties. We have liaisons who call the counties all day long. First thing I did when I came into the Department of State was to visit the election directors in all 67 counties to sit down with them. I had run elections in one county for 10 years, but that doesn't mean you know anything about Elk County and the challenges you face in Adams County or Susquehanna County or anywhere else. So I went around. It seemed like a good idea until I started and got stuck in the 20s and 30s, but finally made it to all 67, and it's a beautiful state. So I'm not complaining. I enjoy doing it and benefited a lot
big
from that
state.
experience.
It's a good-sized state
Yes.
to drive around. I
It
found.
is, but what we saw is tremendous turnover with people leaving their roles, people who had been experienced, very capable people, with all the turnover that we started to see, especially starting in 2020, for all sorts of reasons. The atmosphere changing, or people just retiring, or whatever reason else. So we set up a training unit to train all election directors in Pennsylvania to assist them in knowing what to do to avoid making mistakes, because mistakes in this kind of environment are obviously exploited by people to try to undermine confidence in election results.
So, again, just speaking for yourself, speaking hypothetically, you're watching the screens, you're in the command center. What is making you nervous in an actual election night, before we get to the public reception and people's theories and so on, in terms of like how the logistics work?
Well, I used to only have one county to worry about, and then now I have 67 counties to worry about, but had some authority in one county, and Department of State really has a huge responsibility, but not a great deal of authority. It's not a centrally controlled election administration. Our counties really run elections in Pennsylvania. Our county boards of elections and their staff are the people who really run elections. But we play an important role in assisting them. So when problems do arise, we can make sure that they're prepared. We do tabletop exercises before every election, and a lot of preparation going into avoiding any possible mistake or error or anything like that that could occur.
So in terms of the on-the-ground stuff, you're worried about a machine that doesn't work, an error in the counting, like sort of practical, technical
The mechanics of election
yeah.
administration,
Yeah.
yes. And with no concern whatsoever about parties or candidates or anything else like that, other than that they rely on us for election information.
Do you guys interface, it's a horrible word, sorry, do you guys interact with the media at all during the course of a night like that?
I do not on election day. We work with our county partners, but try to avoid anything in public until the polls close. So I do a press conference before the election and after the election to make sure that we're available to the press and any questions that people might have.
But between the time, I assume that the most anxious period is from when the polls close to when results are actually tabulated and announced. So in that zone, are you, put it this way, are you on social media during an election day?
We have a communications team that's monitoring social media, because sometimes when error or issues do arise, we see them first on social media, and then we have to sort out whether they're true or not true, so that we can be responsive to our county partners.
Right, but that would be sort of a case study, right, where you have something can be a minor problem in an obscure rural county and become a national story effectively via social media.
Whether it's true or not.
Exactly, whether it's true or not, or whether it's some real issue but that is being treated as sabotage or something like that.
And we do use social media to share information counties put out whenever there are any issues. If a polling place closes or some other kind of thing like that, we want to make sure we amplify our county partners' voices and also share accurate information all the time, particularly when things are going viral and untrue.
And how important, this gets us into sort of the why question around people's skepticism about election results, but how important do you think sort of speed and clarity of results are to maintaining people's faith in the process?
I think it's incredibly important, and Pennsylvania, as many people here know, is at a unique disadvantage in mail ballot voting, because we can't begin processing mail ballots until 7 a.m. on election morning.
Yes.
I would hate to, and I never thought in my lifetime I would look to Florida as a state that does a good job when it comes to any aspect of election administration. But even Florida and plenty of red states and plenty of blue states allow mail ballots to be processed, not even counted, but prior to election morning, and that gives you results faster. But ultimately, in every election, it comes down to how close an election is. If it's not close at all, the outcome is pretty clear right away. If the election is close, then it can go on for many days, especially because we can't begin processing ballots until election morning.
Yeah, and I mean, part of me wonders, obviously we'll get into the internet and its effects in a minute, but part of me wonders if some of the focus on and lack of faith in elections just reflects the fact that we have had a number of unusually close elections, right? So when I was a kid, between essentially for my entire lifetime up to the age of 20, every presidential election was, if not a total blowout, at least
Right.
a pretty easy stroll for Reagan twice, Bush, and Clinton twice, right? But then basically from 2000 onward, 2000, 2004, obviously not 2008, a little bit in 2012, but then again in 2016, we've had these elections where you have, even if the Electoral College isn't close in the end, you have crucial states where it's coming down to tens of thousands, 50,000 votes, and so on. And do you think that shapes people's psychology and helps create this interest? I mean, Florida in 2000 sort of created modern fascination with electoral mechanics, right?
I think that's part of it. The presidential election in Pennsylvania was decided by more than 80,000 votes in 2020. Now, that's not a huge percentage of the total electorate, but it's not a handful of votes at all. The biggest thing that's impacting that is when candidates lose and they refuse to acknowledge that they lost and recognize the will of the people in making a decision and making their decision for who should best represent them. So, it doesn't necessarily matter if an election is close or not. It all comes down to candidate behavior and impacting, I think, the psychology of their supporters and electorate.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously that is the unique things about 2020 were driven, you don't have to say his name, but I'll say it, by President Donald Trump's refusal to accept defeat. But as I look at my own interactions with sort of normal American humans who are interested in elections, I do think that there's a kind of escalating pattern where the sort of experience on the Democratic side of Florida in 2000, some of the debates about voting machines in Ohio in 2004 when John Kerry lost, that there's been this kind of bubbling anxiety about elections, suspicion around elections that, again, Trump obviously sort of turbocharges in 2020. But it does seem like in the case of Pennsylvania, right, yes, the election was not incredibly close in 2020 in the end, but there was the lag, right, in terms of counting, where you weren't, into which all kinds of anxieties were poured, it seems to me.
It is a real window of opportunity for bad faith actors to undermine confidence in election results. I don't think there's any doubt about that, the amount of time that it takes before an outcome is clear. And that's why I think Pennsylvania, and use the term, I don't think you said delay, but it's not delayed. It's what our laws require the process to take place, and it has to take place deliberately and with integrity, and there's no rushing through it.
Why doesn't Pennsylvania change the rules?
It has been very difficult to get any election reform moving in Harrisburg in the last several years, as you can imagine, with the polarization and with all the changes that we had with mail-in ballot voting, which is relatively new in Pennsylvania. Even things that everyone seems to agree on, Democrats agree on, Republicans agree on, liberals, conservatives, it's difficult to even get any of that through.
If you could design your ideal, maybe this isn't a question you can answer, but if you could design your ideal system in terms of anything from whether you have mail-in votes or not to whether election day is a public holiday, things like that, is there a best approach?
I would not be able to answer that question.
Okay.
But what I have seen from traveling around the country is how states approach elections very differently from one another. Some are complete mail-in ballot voting states. Others restrict it very much. And it's not, I don't think there's any one best way in our laboratory of democracy, or whatever the expression is, to run elections.
What do you think, and maybe the answer is nothing, which would be very pessimistic, but in your experience, what do you think persuades people who are skeptical of election results to accept them, take have some kind of restored trust in the system?
I think when you make sure that election administration is accessible and that it is transparent, that goes a long way to make sure that expectations are set in advance of election day, so you don't have observers showing up at your local county boards of elections thinking that they're going to be handling ballots or anything else, scrutinizing ballots or anything else like that. I think expectation setting is a major part of it, and does go a long way to it. But again, left or right, high or low profile, candidates accepting the outcome of an election is the most important thing. And in my experience in Philadelphia, you'd go to a Board of Elections meeting and you'd have some Green Party people testify, and then a couple minutes later you have some on the right testify, and they're looking at each other like, yeah, these elections really, there's sort of like a strange common denominator between what we saw with the Jill Stein people some years ago,
right,
and what you might have seen more recently from some Republicans.
You talked about one just on that theme. I also think, one of the things that shaped 2020 there too was that because of COVID, you had substantial changes that varied greatly from state to state, right?
Well, in our case, mail-in ballot voting, I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah.
Mail-in ballot voting passed in Pennsylvania in 2019, before COVID was even on the horizon. And those two things get conflated a lot. And I would add it was passed by a Republican House and a Republican Senate and signed by a Democratic governor. Very bipartisan legislation, made some other changes as well. It got rid of what's called straight ticket voting in Pennsylvania, so you couldn't just vote for your party, you had to go down and make all of your selections. So it did change elections a lot at a very, I think, fragile time and in a significant way. So
that was just an unhappy coincidence that and COVID then interacted.
I don't know, unhappy or not, because it did allow people to vote by mail who were uncomfortable going to a polling place, especially in that environment. It definitely.
But just in terms of confidence in elections, it probably would have been better if you had been able, not that anyone chose this, right, but if you had been able to run the new system a couple of times so it didn't feel like when I talk to, there are obviously, I have Republican friends who are sort of fully committed to a narrative that the 2020 election was stolen. But then I also have Republican and conservative friends who say, yeah, it wasn't stolen exactly, but it did seem like all of the rules were changed because of the pandemic in ways that, again, in this narrative where Republicans assume that if you goose turnout, it helps Democrats, that must have helped the Democrats, right? Like that's sort of a background narrative that, again, a lot of Republicans who didn't go all the way to stop the steal sort of carried with them. And so, but in Pennsylvania's case, it was just sort of an accident that it felt like everything changed at exactly
very significant. I mean, we've had absentee ballot voting in Pennsylvania for a very, very long time, I think since the Civil War. But when
mail-in is a different and more expansive.
It is, because it's no excuse absentee ballot voting,
right,
essentially. And when other states have adopted it, the first year you might get 10% of people voting that way. The next year, 15 or 20. In this case, it went, I think in Philadelphia in 2020, about half the votes were cast by mail, and about half were cast in person on Election Day. So it really kind of supercharged the adoption, I think, of mail ballot voting in Pennsylvania that other states did not experience. And all those changes, even changes like I mentioned for the better, came at a significant price. And that is creating a vulnerability to undermine confidence in our institutions.
Do you feel like 2024 at least partially restored some confidence? Or do you think it sort of, do you think the lack of confidence just sort of exists in a zone untethered from?
Some things did change significantly. In 2020, our counties were new to counting mail-in ballots, other than a small number of absentees. And instead, like Philadelphia, it was half of the votes that came in. Since then, counties have acquired additional equipment to process them better. They've gotten better at designing a system to move things along, to make it more efficient and effective and expeditious without undermining the confidence in undermining the integrity of that process at all. And I think those have resulted in knowing the results earlier in
Right.
Pennsylvania.
Yep.
But again, it always comes down to how close an election is or not, and 2024 was not.
Less, yep. What about, you mentioned could you just say a tiny bit more about the challenge of getting good people to work in elections? Because I know that, threats, paranoia, there's a lot of anxiety that attends doing this kind of civic work now.
Yes. So, and Lauren Costello from Committee of 70 mentioned a little bit before about the need for poll workers. That need is always there, and for experienced election directors. But I have found some things very encouraging. That even though we do have a lot of people leaving, we have a lot of other people willing to step up and serve in these important roles at a challenging time, in an atmosphere that is a lot different, where you're working the polls for 14 hours and your neighbors are coming in and they're giving you grief because they're blaming you about something they saw on the news or saw on Twitter,
right,
or sort of wherever else.
And a more specific question is, some of the people who get involved in politics are presumably getting involved because they're skeptical, right?
Right.
And do you find that when people do that, it boosts their faith? Do you find that it's like the best cure for paranoia or skepticism is civic involvement?
Absolutely.
I'm trying to take it. We're going to do Q&A in a second, so I'm trying to take us to an optimistic finish.
Yeah.
So say something optimistic
when you do have
about
people,
civic engagement.
Philadelphia and Pennsylvania in particular are fortunate to have the Committee of 70 and to have groups like it that don't exist elsewhere in the country to assist with voter education, to assist with any number of things. The more educated our electorate is, the better. The more people, whenever they have questions about elections, I always encourage them to volunteer to be a poll worker. The more you know about elections, the more confidence you have in election results.
Okay, that's a good optimistic beat on which to pivot to about 10 minutes of questions. So I see, yeah, there's a microphone there. There's a microphone here. Again, the lights are a little bright, but I'm just going to call on you, sir. Please, since we have 10 to 12 minutes, be short and to the point in your question.
You got it. Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Antonio. I'm currently a student at Fels Institute of Government at University of Pennsylvania. Thank you for this opportunity. Secretary, I appreciate the pride that you take in ensuring that elections are faithful and effective. In today's world where we have redistricting happen all across the country, where we have federal presence in our local communities, what keeps you up at night as you think about the election next year, but really the presidential that is coming up, and does voter intimidation play a part in what keeps you up at night?
Anyone who is seriously involved in election administration always has trouble sleeping. And that's not because of a guilty conscience, it's because what you're doing is so very important. And our entire system of government and confidence in our institutions really rely on elections being run smoothly. So when any error occurs whatsoever, it's important that everyone's prepared to address any kind of issues that might really come along. So everything keeps me up at night when it comes to election administration.
Do you worry, I mean, again,
yes,
maybe too political, but do you worry, on the question of intimidation, do you worry about the federal government trying to, intervene in some way in state elections?
I have to decline to comment on.
Fair enough. I was telling the Secretary that I recently did a podcast interview with Justice Amy Coney Barrett, and so I have long experience now with asking questions and having public officials refuse to answer them, just like a senator in a confirmation hearing.
It is public knowledge that we are in litigation with the Department of Justice, and that the federal government has sought the private personal information of our 8.8 million voters in Pennsylvania, Social Security numbers, driver's license numbers, and things like that. And we have declined to provide that. And we've declined to provide it because the law would not even allow us to do it if we wanted to. So it's no act of courge to take that position.
There's an answer. Yeah. Just by, anyway, thank you.
Sorry.
Is there a question over here? Yes.
Yes. Hi, my name is Carol Berman. I work in public relations for a health system in Philadelphia. There was a fantastic article in the New York Times in 2020 kind of following your movements over Election Day And how do you cope with, knowing you're doing a really good job in maintaining the integrity, but you and your family are getting dangerous threats, and you're getting all kinds of criticism, but you keep going at it and you keep going back to work? What makes you do that?
I think it's because I, like anyone involved in election administration at the county level, as I certainly was in Philadelphia, really care about the integrity of the process and telling the truth about elections. And 2020 was certainly difficult. It was extremely difficult on my family, obviously, because of the threats that came our way. But it's very easy to tell the truth. The consequences aren't necessarily easy, but telling the truth is easy.
Do you feel, here we are in 2025, you've gone through several election cycles, do you feel better about those issues than you did immediately after 2020? You can say no. You don't have to be optimistic.
I've already used my 3
Yep.
not answering your question cards that I get to play. No, I still think we're at a very fragile state in the juncture of our democratic republic, and it's why it's so important for people to step up and serve in these important roles.
Okay. Yep.
We have some questions in the back.
In the
corner here,
back.
too.
Great. Yes.
Hi, good evening. Marcus Hall, Philadelphia Works, and proud Philadelphia resident. My question, in 2024, there were a number of, I think, strategic bomb threats that went to a number of polling places, and I think we can all understand, like, if there's a coordinated effort where that can deter folks from, obviously, like, safely going to their polling places at certain times, like, that will dissuade folks from being able to vote, and then many circumstances, folks will not be able to come back to obviously vote once that threat has been resolved. I think that's also been the case in a number of other swing states. What's your plan, or what's been like the discussion to be like to really be able to address this going forward, as it really, it impacted my polling place and obviously a number of other communities surrounding our area?
In advance of 2024, the Shapiro administration set up an election threat task force made up of federal, state, and local partners, so that we were all prepared to communicate whenever threats did arise with one another for who was responsible for what. In 2020, when a lot of that ugliness came, we had to scramble a little bit to figure out, where do you provide this information to? Who is responsible for investigating and determining whether a threat was a credible one or not? Fortunately, because of our federal partners, in 2024, we were in touch with them. They let us know in advance that there had been other states that had received bomb threats, so we were very prepared. They only hit Pennsylvania, I think, at around like 7 p.m. And anything that disrupts the flow of elections and voters being able to vote is critically important. In other states, it was earlier and did affect just a few, fortunately, polling places in Pennsylvania. I had a press conference the other day, and I was so curious because we had one bomb threat, and I said, when I answered the question, it was like, we only had one bomb threat. That's sometimes that's not an optimistic point, but that's sometimes the.
It's a big and complicated country, and honestly,
yeah, and it's always about being prepared. It's always about preparing in advance of every election, so when anything occurs, there are steps ready. People with defined responsibilities to make sure that voting can continue.
Are there legal accommodations to just to that question's point in the event that something worse goes wrong and some voting is substantially disrupted in a particular area?
Yes.
What does the Pennsylvania law say about ensuring that votes can be cast in that kind of situation?
You would go to the local county court and seek to have the polling places kept open longer,
Okay.
which did
So
happen.
they can issue orders.
They can issue an order for another half an hour or an hour or 2 hours or whatever would be most appropriate to allow voters to still make their voice heard.
All right. I think we've got a couple minutes. Is there one more question?
Take your time, because I'm not going to be able to stand up from this chair.
Where?
I have a question for you.
On which?
I am slowly disappearing into it.
Yes.
Yes.
I'll be able to wave.
For my question, I'd like to take a survey of how many veterans are there in the audience here tonight? A small handful. So as one who also placed their life on the altar of democracy, I would suggest that the current mechanism for elections is underserving, my effort, my sacrifice. What are you hearing of any other, let me rephrase my question. Are you hearing ranked choice as a means of election, as a possible choice in our future?
Did you say ranked choice?
Ranked choice,
As
yeah.
in ranked choice voting?
Yeah.
There is some legislation in Harrisburg that relates to ranked choice voting. Other legislation is more like ballot candidate position randomization or rotation, so the ballot position doesn't have the sort of impact that it can in some elections. And there is legislation that would bring ranked choice voting to Pennsylvania. It is an extremely complicated mechanism, and I already testified to this, so I can say it now. Concerns that it comes at a great price, and that is delays in knowing who won and who lost an election.
And also, right, and also the sense of that would be another case where you would effectively have to do a sustained civic education campaign to explain to people why. I mean, you saw this a bit in New York, you saw it in Maine, right? Scenarios where someone gets the most first place votes and doesn't win the election. And that's how the system is supposed to work. But it does seem like, yeah, your job as a civic educator would be transformed by that kind of transformation.
And I'm not advocating for or against
Right.
it. It's just that any change in elections comes at some price. So they have changed a lot in the past several years, as we talked about, and there are still issues related to recent changes that we'd like to see resolved first.
Let's do one last question. I'm sure, yeah.
Hi, my name is Ashley. I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, and I do a lot of work related to youth civic engagement on campus. Given that youth civic engagement is historically lower than the national average, what do you see as the biggest obstacle, specifically in Pennsylvania, to youth voter registration, and where do you predict youth voter turnout will look like in the 2026 and 2028 elections?
Well, I know the Committee of 70 and also partnering with Department of State in working with colleges and universities to make it easier for younger college students in a more transient population to register to vote. I think that's a big thing. When you do see lines on Election Day, very long lines, it's usually in precincts or divisions in Pennsylvania where there are colleges and universities. Students think they're automatically registered when they go to school, and they're not. So it creates lines, more people voting by provisional ballots that take longer. But we closely tracked in the Commissioner's Office in Philadelphia, and Commissioner Bluestein continues to do it, voting behavior by age cohort. And that number really does whiplash around a lot from 18 to 34-year-olds, sometimes very engaged, other times much less so.
Do you feel like, this is my last moderator's privilege, last question. When I was a college student, I was thinking about this because of the question, it was the Bush v. Gore election in 2000, obviously before Florida happened, before it became an election debacle. And the perception then was that the biggest problem in American democracy for a lot of civic-minded people, the kind of people who would serve on a commission like this, was that it was apathy, right? It was that people didn't care enough about the outcome of the election. They felt like the two parties were too similar, right? And so they didn't bother turning out to vote. And I often think about the extent to which, of all the problems we've created, we sort of solved that problem, right? but people do feel like, I guess I just wonder about this when I think about American democracy and how it actually works, right? That some of the passions, including destructive passions, that you have to deal with in your work are themselves an expression of people caring more about the outcome of elections than they did when I was in college. I just wonder how you think about that.
Yep, very much, and it's one reason why there is such reason for optimism, in the sense that you do have people care so much about elections now that never did before, whether they're 18 or they're 80.
Yeah.
Whether they're seniors or seniors, caring a lot more about elections and engaging and stepping up to play an important role in the functioning of our system of government.
All right, on that note, I'd ask you to thank the Secretary for answering 90% of my questions. Thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
Thank you.
And before you disperse to contemplate the wonders of increased civic engagement in 2020's America, I want to note that there is a reception, I believe, downstairs. I hope you'll all join us for it and be civically engaged deep into the night. So thank you all so much again.